I used to believe that nothing truly dangerous happens all at once. It arrives quietly. It blends into routine. It wears the face of familiarity. That's what makes it so easy to miss, until it's too late. At the time, my life looked stable from the outside. A marriage that had lasted long enough to feel permanent. A house that carried the echo of shared years. Conversations that still happened, though they rarely went anywhere meaningful. My husband was kind, dependable, and increasingly distant in ways neither of us named. We lived beside each other more than with each other, and I told myself that was just what time did to love. Loneliness doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it's just the absence of being noticed. He had been around for a while, long enough that his presence no longer felt new. He belonged to my husband's world, his routines, his obligations. I never questioned why he was there so often. He was simply part of the environment, like the furniture you stop seeing after years in the same room. I didn't think about him. Not consciously. If you'd asked me then, I would have said he was just someone passing through our lives. Someone familiar. Someone harmless. The days blurred together. Evenings followed the same pattern. My husband came home late, distracted, tired. I filled the silence with chores, television noise, anything that made the house feel less hollow. And sometimes, he was there too, sitting across the room, scrolling on his phone, half listening when I spoke. It wasn't flirtation, not then, but I started to notice small things. The way he lingered in conversations instead of rushing away. The way his attention stayed focused when he asked how my day had been. Not politely, genuinely, as if the answer mattered. That should have meant nothing. And I told myself it did. Still, there were moments that felt different. Passing each other in the hallway, standing too close in the kitchen, a silence stretching just a second longer than necessary. Nothing inappropriate, nothing obvious, just an awareness I couldn't quite explain. I dismissed it immediately. I told myself I was imagining things. That loneliness makes you sensitive to kindness. That being seen can feel like attraction when it isn't. I repeated those thoughts until they sounded convincing. Control, I believed, was simply a matter of knowing where the line was. And I was certain I hadn't crossed it. That night began like any other. No dramatic argument. No confession waiting to happen. Just an ordinary evening wrapped in quiet. If I had gone to bed earlier, if I had ignored that small voice urging me to stay awake, everything would still be intact. But I didn't. And that was the first mistake. If you want, say, part 2 inches. And I'll continue with the escalation, where emotional boundaries begin to blur and denial starts to crack. That night didn't feel dangerous at first. It felt ordinary, almost dull in its simplicity. The house was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you become too aware of your own thoughts. My husband had gone to bed early, exhausted, leaving the living room lit by a single lamp and the low hum of the television. He was still awake. I noticed him only because he hadn't retreated to his usual corner. Instead, he lingered, hovering at the edge of the room as if unsure whether to stay or go. When he spoke, his voice was soft, careful, like he didn't want to disturb something fragile. "Can't sleep?" he asked. I shook my head. That was all it took. A simple question, an invitation that didn't sound like one. We talked about nothing important. About the day, about things that didn't require honesty or effort. But there was a difference in the way the conversation moved, slower, more deliberate. He listened without interruption. He remembered details I didn't realize I'd shared before. That should have been my warning. Instead, it felt comforting. Time stretched. The television became background noise, forgotten. At some point, I realized we were sitting closer than before. Not touching, just close enough to feel the warmth of another presence. Close enough to make moving away feel noticeable. I told myself it still meant nothing. But my thoughts betrayed me. I became aware of the way he looked at me, not boldly, not improperly, but with an attention I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't desire I recognized at first. It was recognition, as if he saw me not as a role I played, but as a person standing quietly in front of him. That's how it starts, I would later realize. Not with longing, but with being seen. I crossed the first line without stepping anywhere. I stayed when I should have excused myself. I answered questions honestly instead of politely. I laughed too freely. I let the silence stretch instead of filling it with excuses to leave. Inside my head, I argued with myself. This is harmless. This is just conversation. You're allowed to feel noticed. When he mentioned how lonely the house felt sometimes, something inside me tightened. The words mirrored my own thoughts too closely. It felt dangerous to agree, but I did. Not out loud, just with my eyes, with the pause before I responded. That was enough. Nothing happened. Not physically, not overtly, but when he finally stood to leave the room, the air felt heavier in his absence. The space he'd occupied remained charged, like something unfinished had been left behind. I went to bed that night wide awake, replaying every moment I'd dismissed too quickly. I told myself tomorrow would reset everything. That daylight would restore the boundaries I'd let blur. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. The line was still intact. I just wasn't standing as far from it anymore. When you're ready, say, part 3 inches. And I'll continue with the night everything breaks, where restraint gives way and consequences begin to form. I spent the next day pretending nothing had changed. I moved through the house with practiced ease, answering questions, completing routines, smiling when expected. But beneath it all, my thoughts kept circling back to the night before, replaying silences, glances, words that had carried more weight than they should have. I told myself distance would fix it. That resolve lasted until evening. My husband came home late again. Distracted, apologetic in the same tired way that required no response. He ate quickly, spoke little, and disappeared into the bedroom, leaving the rest of the house suspended in quiet. And then there was him. He didn't seek me out. That made it worse. He moved carefully, respectfully, as if unaware of the chaos unfolding in my mind. The restraint felt deliberate, even if it wasn't. It made every interaction sharper, more charged. We crossed paths in the kitchen. Just that. But something was different now. The air between us felt thinner, stretched tight by everything we hadn't said. When our eyes met, neither of us looked away immediately. The pause was brief, but it was real. I didn't mean to make things awkward last night, he said finally, voice low. There it was, the acknowledgement I hadn't allowed myself to name. I could have ended it then. I should have. One sentence, one step back, one clear boundary restored. Instead, I shook my head. It wasn't awkward, I replied. Just unexpected. The word lingered between us. That was the moment everything shifted, from accident to choice. We talked again, not about the night, not directly. But our words carried an undercurrent now, something intimate and unspoken. Each sentence felt like a test. Each pause asked a question neither of us dared to voice. I was acutely aware of the doorways, the walls, the rooms where other people slept. Awareness sharpened desire and guilt at the same time. My heart raced, not with excitement alone, but with fear. This is wrong, I told myself. This ends now. But when he stepped closer, still not touching, still careful, I didn't move away. My body betrayed my intentions, rooted in place while my thoughts scrambled for logic. I don't want to do something we can't take back, he said quietly. That should have saved us. Instead, it shattered the last illusion of innocence. Because it meant he felt it too. Whatever it was. I swallowed hard, my voice barely steady. Neither do I. And yet, neither of us stepped back. The silence that followed was unbearable. Heavy with everything unresolved. My thoughts screamed warnings, consequences, futures collapsing under the weight of one bad decision. But in that moment, all I could feel was the closeness. The heat of proximity. The way restraint itself had become unbearable. When it finally happened, it wasn't sudden. It was slow, hesitant, almost reverent in its caution. A crossing that felt less like falling and more like surrender. The second it was real, I knew. There would be no pretending after this. And whatever came next, regret, exposure, loss, it was already set in motion. When you're ready, say, part 4 inches. And I'll conclude with the aftermath, guilt, consequences, and an unresolved ending that leaves the audience questioning everything, not because something dramatic happened, but because nothing did. The house woke the same way it always had. Light slipped through the curtains. Footsteps echoed in familiar patterns. Coffee brewed. Doors opened and closed. Life continued, indifferent to the fracture running quietly through it all. That was the cruelest part. I avoided mirrors. I avoided him. I avoided my husband's eyes most of all. Guilt settled into me like a second skin, heavy, constant, impossible to shrug off. What had felt inevitable the night before now felt reckless in the cold clarity of daylight. I told myself it was over, that it had to be. But endings are rarely decided by intention alone. He was careful, distant in a way that hurt more than closeness ever could. When we passed each other, our conversations were clipped, polite, painfully restrained. Anyone watching would have seen nothing unusual. And yet, every silence screamed with what we both knew. The worst moments came when my husband spoke to me, casual, unaware, trusting. Each word felt like an accusation simply because it wasn't one. He had no idea what had shifted beneath his feet, how the foundation he stood on had cracked overnight. At night, sleep refused to come. My thoughts replayed everything relentlessly, not just what happened, but what it meant. I questioned myself constantly. Was it loneliness, or something deeper? Was it a mistake, or a truth I had been denying? Could one night really undo years of loyalty? I wanted answers. I wanted absolution, but all I had was silence. Eventually, he broke it. Not with a confession or a demand, just a quiet moment when the house was empty again. He didn't step too close. Didn't lower his voice. Didn't ask for anything. I think about it all the time, he said simply. So did I. But I shook my head anyway. We can't. The words sounded convincing, necessary, hollow. He nodded, accepting my answer with a calm that unsettled me. As if he already knew restraint didn't erase memory. As if he understood that some lines, once crossed, never truly disappear. Nothing more was said. Days turned into weeks. Routine returned, but it was altered, stretched thin by secrets. I played my role well. Too well. And yet, every now and then, I caught him watching me, not with longing this time, but with something heavier. Something unfinished. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if silence will be enough to bury what happened, or if it will surface in ways I can't control. I don't know whether guilt fades, or simply becomes easier to live with. What I do know is this. That night didn't just change what I did. It changed who I am. And some changes don't ask permission before they stay.